Welcome to this class. In this class, we want to continue with our discussion on feeding relationship in an ecosystem. In the previous lesson, we talked about food chain, and we said that a food chain is a feeding relationship in which an organism has only one source of food. For instance, when we have a lizard feeding on grass or a grasshopper feeding on grass and lizard feeding on grasshopper and a dog feeding on lizard and maybe man eating the dog. So it's a linear sequence or a linear pathway in a feeding relationship. Each organism has only one food source or one food that it eats in a food chain. But in food web, a food web is a complex feeding relationship in which an organism has so many other sources of food. So unlike in a food chain where we have only one source of food for an organism, in a food web, each organism has more than one source of food. So if you look at a food web, it is not always a straight chain like the food chain. It is always a complex network or different organisms connected to each other depending on how they feed. Now, example of such network is when we have normally the first thing is the producer, which is the plants. So let's start with grass. We have grass. Then lizard is eaten by, let's say, dog. Then we have goats. Now, if you look at this is a food web. It's a very complex feeding relationship. Now, here we have, let's start with the grass. The grass is the primary food supplier in this web. It is supplying food to grasshopper, and the grasshopper is being eaten by lizard. Lizard also eats grass, so it can eat the grasshopper and still eat grass. So the lizard has two sources of food. Now let's look at the dog. The dog eats lizard and also eats goats. So dog also has two sources of food in this feeding relationship. Now goats eat grass, while dog eats the goats and also eats the lizard. So this is a complex feeding relationship, and it involves different organisms having different sources of food supply. This is what we call food web. It is different from the food chain, where we have only one source of food for every organism in the feeding relationship. We can give another example of a food web. If we have or let's use organisms in aquatic system. Organisms in aquatic system. Now let's start with seaweed. Now seaweed is eaten by fish, small fish. Shark will eat shark. Shark will eat the small fish, and shark will eat human being. The arrow is pointing to the one that it is eating. So shark eats fish and also eats human being. Then man eats fish. Man eats fish. So the shark has two sources of food. It eats the fish and also eats man. And and the fish eats the seaweed here. Now we can also put other organisms into this. Man is also eaten by hippopotamus or hippo. It also eats man. So this and it also feed on seaweed. So this is a complex feeding relationship within the aquatic ecosystem. Now the first one we described is a feeding relationship in a terrestrial habitats. So we can create a feeding relationship, a food web in any kind of ecosystem, showing a relationship that exists when the organisms in such habitats or such ecosystem feed. And that is what we call food web. I believe that this lesson is very clear.